without further ado, our final presenters.
Hi, I'm Nathan Dawkin. I am Ben Weiss's junior for his project, and before we start, I would just like to point out a few things. I was chosen as his junior because we have similar interests and we're already pretty good friends. And I actually did some work, as opposed to most juniors. Many juniors. Many, to avoid getting tomatoes thrown at me. So, one thing I would like to talk about to begin with is that one of the things that influenced Ben and I to do parallel projects, even though I kept mine mostly short, is the movie The Last Samurai. We both saw it and we loved the movie. And I decided, with Ben, that I should make a montage of it, seeing how I did all the work. So, I would like to show you our movie, the movie that I made about the movie that influenced us. And, yeah.
inevitable death should be performed daily. Every day, when one's body and mind are at peace, one should meditate upon being ripped apart by arrows, rifles, spears, and swords, being carried away by surging waves, being thrown into the midst of a great fire, being struck by lightning, being shaken to death by an earthquake, falling from 1,000-foot cliffs, dying of disease, or committing seppuku at the death of one's master. And every day, without fail, one should consider himself dead. This is one of the many expectations from the book Hagakure, in its descriptions of how a samurai, a member of the famous katana-wielding warrior class of feudal Japan, should conduct his life. Derived from an ancient Japanese word meaning to serve, the samurai were a fearless and honorable warrior class that put serving their lords and the emperor as their highest priority. The samurai have a fascinating history, a culture rich with tradition, art, unique weaponry, and spirituality, and a code of honor for the warrior class documented like none other in the world. From the 800s to the 1800s, the samurai dominate the history of Japan, fighting in the near-constant civil wars and bloody family feuds that ravaged Japan for literally 1,000 years straight. My name is Ben Weiss, and this is what I have spent my senior project studying. The Last Samurai is one of my favorite movies, and while I know that not everything in it is totally historically accurate, it is a Hollywood take on real happenings. The depictions of the sword arts and the philosophies of the dying samurai class spoke to me. When it came time to do my senior project, looking into the samurai was one of the ideas left on my short list. I looked in depth at two aspects of the samurai. First, I spent many hours sifting through numerous books, researching the history, culture, weapons, and mentality of the warrior class. And I wrote a large paper as the culmination of that note-taking, which is compiled in this book along with a shorter one on the construction and care of Japanese blades. And this book chronicles like the entirety of my senior project. The second thing that I studied were Japanese sword arts at a dojo, for some often intense, hands-on research. Because my project was initially based on wanting to learn the sword arts, that is what the presentation is going to focus on, although feel free to ask anything samurai-related in the Q&A at the end. First, I'll give a brief overview of the kind of work that we did at the dojo. Then, with a narration from Nate, I will demonstrate some simple sword exercises. And before I wrap up, I'll show a couple of clips from a sword tournament to show the kind of exercises and skills that I could have if I managed to keep up with these studies later on. A dojo is a martial arts training hall with any of the supplies, furnishings, and specializations that entails. I studied at Chikara Dojo on Rice Street in Little Canada because it offered the two types of sword arts that I wished to study, as well as a couple of other weapons and martial arts. Sadly, the dojo closed down a few months back. The first thing that we trained in was the spear. All brand new students learn the basics of the spear first. The Japanese spear is called a yari, and Nate, if you want to slip the sheath off, you can. And it has a unique tip different from most others in the world, ideal for puncturing through ribs. It is a versatile weapon, like most Japanese weapons, because the whole body of the weapon can be used for both defending yourself as well as in attacking an enemy. We learn various types of blocks, thrusts, and strikes in the dojo. We would study with 6-foot staffs or longer poles with padding on one end at beginner levels, and more advanced students could practice some of the drills with a live blade. We did a good bit of sparring with spear, mostly wooden spear, at the dojo, which was always a very vigorous exercise on both the mind and the body. I also spent a couple of weeks in a bujutsu class where we studied unarmed combat. We looked at different types of holds, grappling, submissions, and falls, as well as practiced fighting spear against other weapons like the sword of the naginata. Once in a while in these classes, we also practiced a little bit of knife fighting, which is kind of fun. The two sword arts that I studied were kenjutsu and iai-jutsu. Kenjutsu is a sword art that focuses more on combat, duel, and sparring techniques. We learned different kinds of blocks, stances, thrusts, and cuts. I didn't have a whole lot of time to really get into sparring, only just kind of looking at the very basics. Iai-jutsu is more practicing kata, which are sets of movements to hone different techniques, both physical and mental, and working on your form and your skill rather than your tactics and your strength. Beginning students would study sword arts with a bokken, the wooden one there, which is a close approximation to the weight and shape of a real sword. And advanced students could practice kata and cutting with live, sharp blades. One weapon that I didn't get a chance to start, as it is a style for advanced students, is the naginata. And this is a training when I wasn't able to rope a real one into the presentation tonight, sadly. But it is an enlarged scythe, was often used from horseback, and was made famous by the warrior monks. It combines the techniques of a polearm and a sword, making it a difficult weapon to learn. And as you can basically see, it's a sword on a stick, really long stick. I would very much like to have a chance to study the naginata with a skilled instructor someday. Besides studying combat skills with and without weapons, in the dojo we also learned about the anatomy and how to clean the various blades. And I was shocked to learn that a Japanese blade will start to rust within minutes of it touching skin. We also covered dojo etiquette, like how and when to bow to opponents, instructors, and weapons, how to stand when being non-combative, how to kneel during practice, and some simple meditation styles. The philosophy of the living sword was something mentioned one evening that enthralled and confused me. The Zen Buddhist aspect of the samurai created this idea that for a true swordsman, the sword was not an instrument of death, but one to preserve life, and that Zen swordsmanship should be the discipline of actually not killing. The sword itself is what kills for the Zen swordsman, not the actual samurai. The enemy appears, makes himself the victim, and the sword works automatically to serve justice or mercy. The Zen sword was not to simply kill, but to end the root of a conflict. Killing was not something to be enjoyed by a samurai. To kill otherwise was to admit to failure as a Zen samurai. Now, let's move on into the fun part of this presentation. I will be demonstrating the 12 basic sword kata that we studied at the dojo. Kata are, like I had mentioned before, sets of movements to hone different skills. Each kata consists of 4 basic parts. Nuki, drawing the sword out of the scabbard. Kiri, making 1 or more attacks. Chuburi, a motion to remove blood from the blade. And Noto, resheathing the sword. The kata focus on practicing certain techniques like drawing the sword well, or this type of cut, or this type of thrust. The idea is that you would practice your kata until you can perform them flawlessly and fluidly. Before I start each kata, Nate will give the name and a very short description of what each entails so that you, as the audience, can watch and identify what the parts are.
Mai. Starting from a seated position called seiza, attack opponent to the front. Hajime. Ushiro. From seiza, attack an opponent behind you. Hajime. Uke Nagashi. From seiza, parry and attack opponent to the left. Hajime. Tsukate. From a seated position called Tateeza, attack 2 opponents, front and behind, incorporating a strike and reverse thrust. Hajime. rest of the kata will be done standing. Kesagiri. Attack opponent in front with a kesakai. Hajime. Morote Tsuki. Attack two opponents, front and behind, incorporating a two-handed thrust. Hajime. Sanpo Giri. Attack opponents to the right, left, and front. Hajime. Ganmanate. Attack two opponents, front and behind, incorporating a strike and one-handed thrust. Did I just say that?
Wait, no, we're on Gun.
Yeah. Okay. Hajime. Suete Tsuki. Attack an opponent to the left, incorporating a supported thrust. Hajime. Shiho Giri. Attack four opponents in diagonal four directions, incorporating various elements. Hajime. So Giri. Attack opponent to the front 5 times. Hajime. Nukiuchi. Backstep, block, and attack opponent to the front. Hajime.
So that is what we spent the bulk of our sword classes working on at the dojo. Now, here are some clips from the Sengoku Classic Sword Tournament, which took place in November. As I had only been training for a month at the time, I didn't compete, but I went to watch and film, so I could see what I would be able to do later on in my training. Here will be some examples of the competitors doing kata, similar to what I was doing with live blades, cutting tatami mats, which are soaked rolls of straw, and sparring. Some examples of the competitors doing kata different from what I was doing. Some were more advanced because they're from different schools. Occasionally, students would sort of make up their own scenario in terms of where opponents were. Second, like I had mentioned, would be some examples of cutting. Tatami mats, which are rolls of straw, bounded up, soaked for a couple days in a big bin of water to get them nice and juicy so that they would kind of simulate bodies when you cut through them. And then some examples of sparring, some longer duels where there was more of a hit and block that kind of went on for, I think the longest one was on the longest clip, like 30 seconds. 30 seconds out of like a 3 minute.
45.
Okay, 45 seconds. And then a couple examples of what might be considered more traditional Japanese duels where there was sort of a standoff for a little bit, just the competitors staring each other down, and then they would be looking for the other person to let their guard down, to flinch, to telegraph what they were going to do, and the other person going in, and those are really over in a snap. You know, just the first person to move would often win. So I'm really disappointed that it didn't work. Well, wow. It has been quite a task to sit down and look at the 400 or so hours of work that I had done for this project and figure out what to pull out and put in the spotlight for you all tonight. I could have very easily done a half-hour presentation on the research that I've done, or even just looking at the samurai history, or just their weaponry. But I decided to pull out my beginner sword skills because I thought it would be something more interesting than just watching through a PowerPoint, and something that not many other students have ever done before. And I hope that you all would agree with that. Yes? Yes? Maybe? I've had an absolute blast with this project, except for a little dry spell in the middle. But I have found both the research as well as the sword arts great endeavors. And I'd also very much like to continue with practicing sword arts in college. I guess I just need to find a way to get my katana into my dorm room. Well, now before we get to the Q&A, there are a couple of people that I'd like to thank. And since I don't have a PowerPoint, you get to listen to me mention them all individually.
And if we did have a PowerPoint, it probably wouldn't work.
So first, I would like to thank Carl Knox, the guy standing up back there, who is my community expert. He was the instructor, or one of the instructors, and the owner of Chikara Dojo. And so he taught the sword class, as well as answered a lot of questions via email and at the dojo, as well as he was kind enough to provide his yari for the demonstration this evening. I would also like to mention Paul and Dina and Gretchen, who are the advisors that I had on my committee for all of their time and proofreading. My parents, thank you very much for your money for dojo tuition, and transportation, and support throughout the project. Molly, who helped a lot with hashing out the details of how the presentation was going to go, offered some really great advice, and yeah, the stuff didn't work. What was I? Metro
Cut
Transit.
one clip out.
Yes, good job, the good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Metro Transit for get me where I needed to go, specifically the dojo.
Except for that one time.
Yeah, one time. Also, just mentioning Avalon School, a place where a project like this can happen, and especially Nate Dockin, my junior, who did a lot of work through the project, studied with me at the dojo, helped really put this presentation together. All the work that you did alongside me and for me, thank you very much. Good. So, any questions? Yes?
I have one. Every time that you completed your movements, you used your fingers to wipe the blade. Would that have been typical? Would they have used their fingers to wipe the blade before putting it
I
back
wasn't
in?
actually wiping the blade. That was more guiding the sword into the scabbard without, cutting myself or stabbing into my abdomen.
That's not good.
Yes.
You mentioned the Zen sword and, kind of that whole thing that was really fascinating.
Yeah, took a lot of time to completely wrap my mind around.
Well, then it makes me curious more about, the mind of the warrior and the spirituality. Could you talk a little about that?
I'm not sure how much more ease that I could explain it myself than what I did in the paper, because it was really confusing to start with this aspect that the samurai were incredibly powerful killing machines who were very good at what they did, and then to read this aspect of the living sword and Zen Buddhism, and to see that what they were doing in their mind was ending the root of a conflict, whether it was trying to stave off the invasion from the Mongolian army, or protect their land from another Japanese family who was trying to take it over, or take over land to make their family better, or at the end of the samurai days to kind of try to protect the emperor and the traditional ideas from the encroaching Western ideas. That everything that they were doing was to end a conflict and to serve their lord at the same time, was just really difficult to wrap my mind around. And I found that I became much more zen about a lot of things, just through this project and through all the reading and through especially the work at the dojo, that it wasn't learning how to kill people, it was discipline for yourself and preserving the art that was kind of going out of existence. Dean.
Ben, could you comment on the relationship to the sword? Does one develop a personal relationship to the sword? Like that is an extension of your body or an extension
Yes,
of who you are?
definitely.
Very much so.
Many people many samurai and samurai historians would say that the sword is the soul of a samurai, that it is integral to what they were. Oftentimes, swords would be passed down within the family, which would sort of give it an added value because this was the sword that helped save your family and your family's land from this or that. And the samurai and any warrior, or any swordsman in general, would see their sword when they're fighting with it as an extension of their body. It's like a longer limb.
That doesn't get cut off.
That hopefully doesn't get cut off. And so it's not something alien. It's not something outside. It is you, which makes it easier to control because you're not thinking about holding onto this thing and controlling where the thing went. It was controlling where you were going. And from the Buddhist aspect, completely forgot what I was going to say about the Buddhist aspect. But it was interesting to sort of feel that connection. I'm not sure how to really describe it, but to feel that connection, even with just my wooden bokken when we were at the dojo, because that's what I would do all of my training with at the dojo, just to feel the connection that from the first time that I walked in with it, it was like a bat, but looked cooler and way different. It was like a bat at first, and then it just becomes like a natural part of you. You know how to control it. You know exactly where it's going to go. And so I think a lot of it is really hard to describe because it's personal, and just like a very metaphysical connection. Jerry?
You presented an art history class. You talked about the visual aspect of the samurai headdress dress and the clothing. Can you talk some more about that?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
This is not a dress, by the way. This is actually pants.
So the samurai armor that Jerry was talking about would oftentimes be very ornate, especially for the heads of the houses and the generals. Very colorful. A lot of times you would see, especially in museums and movies, helmets with really, really large horns on top. And it was just, a way of kind of showing off the power of the person and their status in society, as well as just as sort of an intimidation factor. But oftentimes they also include some kind of spiritual symbol, whether it was something in nature, a god, a family emblem, just to have some sort of metaphysical connection between themselves and their cause. Should I elaborate enough for you?
Yeah.
Gretchen?
Theo really wants to know why you have two different swords.
Okay.
Eli wants
Two
to know where
swords.
he can get some.
Well, I got these at a flea market, and so they're not real. And Carl, I'm sorry that I'm practicing with fake blades. So these are the representations, at least, of the two swords that the samurai were famous for. The long one, the katana, is the one that I was using earlier, and that would be the one they would most often do combat with, because it's long and easier to hit people that are farther away from you. The short sword is called a wakizashi, and traditionally it was the one that you would always wear no matter where you were going. You walked in a friend's house, even if you were a friend, you would always take your katana off and either set it next to you when you sat down to have tea, or give it to a servant to put in another room, but you were always allowed to keep your wakizashi with you in case they decided to not like you anymore. And some samurai became famous for fighting with both swords, which is incredibly difficult to do, coordinating the moves of both really, really sharp metal sticks to protect you and to attack. And so these together would be called the daisho, the big and the short, and were really what made the samurai identifiable as a class, because it was only the samurai who could wear the two swords at the same time.
How physically demanding would you say swordsmanship is?
Depends on if you're doing kata or if you're sparring, because sparring can result in some really bad injuries like broken fingers or concussions or death. So even practicing drills with somebody like another student or your instructor can be really hard, because you start hitting the bokken really hard to sort of get the real feel of what hard contact is like, and that makes your arms hurt just a little bit. So sparring is physically intense as well as mentally intense, because you're thinking strategy the whole time and trying really hard not to hurt your opponent and to not get yourself hurt. Kata can also be intense. You can either do it flimsy, like you don't care, but then you're not really good at kata. The kata would be more mentally intense in terms of constantly critiquing yourself on, did I do this right? Did I do this right? Concentrating that you're making your form as best as possible. Answer? Question? Molly? I'll get to you.
Nate mentioned this a little bit at the beginning of the presentation, but I am wanting to ask how Avalon decides to create this model of incorporating a junior in a senior project for several reasons. What of those reasons, and in which ways was that particularly effective for you as a learner to have a peer to work with? Did it deepen the sophistication of what you learned, and anything else you might want to throw in?
Okay. Well, I believe that when the senior project was first devised in terms of how everything was going to work, so that seniors could not have a senior slide and graduate, they incorporated juniors into a project mostly so that the juniors could see what they're getting themselves into, what they're going to have to do next year, walk through the steps, see what a proposal has to be like, what all the work has to be like, the meetings, the finalization, kind of get a taste, as well as to give the senior someone to work with. In some cases, it's just, hey, show up for a finalization meeting today in 5 minutes, or you're free. In some cases, it's proofreading. In some cases, Nate's, this juniors will do stuff with the seniors because, you know, they've been able to find somebody who has mutual interests. And so like I had mentioned in my acknowledgments, for Nate and I, it has worked really well because he's had an interest in the samurai and the martial arts, and so we studied the martial arts together. When there was a third aspect about looking at pop culture, Nate and I did a Star Wars marathon. We watched all 6, and we're sort of talking about, you know, how is the samurai here and here and here, and then we realized, the Jedi are almost more like ninjas. than
They
samurai.
really are.
Yeah.
I did a project on it.
But I think that for me it's been really great because I've been able to find somebody with an interest who I can bounce ideas off of, do projects with, go to the dojo with, and so it's been really great for me. And I would like to think that Nate has sort of got an idea of what he's going to have to do next year for the museum project.